The first snow of November hit Whispering Pines, Montana, harder than anyone expected. By mid-afternoon, the temperature had dropped to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind howled through the valley like a wounded animal. Up on Ridge Road, where the newer cabins sat like crowns overlooking the frozen lake, smoke curled from every chimney. Down the slope, tucked between towering pines and nearly invisible from the main road, stood Marcus Webb's cabin. It looked nothing like the others. While his neighbors had built their retreats with floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek metal roofing, and blonde wood interiors that gleamed like something from a magazine, Marcus's place seemed to belong to another era entirely. The exterior was rough-hewn timber, darkened by years of exposure and treatment with a deep walnut stain. The windows were small and few, positioned strategically rather than aesthetically. The roof was steeply pitched and covered in dark composite shingles that seemed to drink in what little sunlight filtered through the perpetual cloud cover. Inside, the cabin was even darker. Rich, chocolate-brown wood paneling covered every wall. The ceiling beams were exposed and stained nearly black. The floors were wide planks of reclaimed barn wood, worn smooth and dark as coffee. Even the furniture followed the same theme. A leather sofa the color of tobacco, heavy wooden chairs, and a stone fireplace with a surround of dark river rock. Marcus had built it himself over 3 years, working weekends and summers, learning as he went. He was a high school shop teacher in the valley below, a quiet man of 42 who had never married and preferred the company of his German shepherd, Kodiak, to most people. The cabin was his sanctuary, his masterpiece, his retirement plan. His neighbors saw it differently. It started at the Ridge Road community meeting in September, before the cold set in. Marcus had attended reluctantly, knowing his cabin was about to become a topic of discussion. Sure enough, 20 minutes into the meeting, Vanessa Hartley stood up. She was a real estate developer from Seattle who had built the largest cabin on the ridge, all glass and steel and automated everything. She brings up community standards without looking at me directly. Your property values, she says to the room. Aesthetic cohesion. When people drive up here, they expect a certain level of sophistication. Then her eyes finally land on me. Some structures, she continues, look more like something you'd find in Appalachia than a premium mountain community. The room got quiet. A few people shifted in their seats. Marcus felt his face heat up but said nothing. Trevor Sutton jumped in next. He was a tech investor, 31 years old, with a cabin that cost more than Marcus made in 5 years. The guy had never built anything with his own hands in his life. I have to agree, Trevor said, scrolling through his phone as he talked. I showed my architect a photo of that cabin, and he actually laughed. Called it the Dark Ages Special. No offense, but it brings down the whole vibe up here. Offense taken, Marcus thought, but again he stayed silent. The comments continued. Someone mentioned the lack of outdoor lighting. Another person brought up the fact that Marcus cut his own firewood instead of having it delivered. By the end of the meeting, it was clear Marcus Webb and his dark, old-fashioned cabin were the neighborhood embarrassment. Driving home that night, Marcus felt something hard settle in his chest. He had poured everything into that cabin. Every board had been chosen with care. Every nail had been driven with purpose. The darkness was not neglect. It was design. But explaining that to people like Vanessa and Trevor felt like trying to teach philosophy to stones. October brought more of the same. At the general store in town, Marcus overheard Vanessa telling the cashier about the eyesore on her street. At the hardware store, Trevor was showing people photos on his phone, laughing about the caveman who lived below their ridge. Even the friendlier neighbors, like the Johnsons, seemed embarrassed by association. They stopped waving when they drove past. Marcus stopped going to town as much. He spent more time in his cabin, working on the last few details, testing systems, preparing for winter. Kodiak sensed his mood and stayed close, resting his big head on Marcus's knee while they sat by the fire. By the time the first serious snow fell in November, Marcus had made peace with being the outcast. He did not need their approval. He had built something solid, something real, something that would last. Let them have their glass palaces and their automated thermostats. He had what mattered. The storm hit on a Tuesday. The storm turned vicious overnight. By Wednesday morning, the power lines along Ridge Road were down, buried under 3 feet of snow and ice. The temperature plummeted to 5 below zero, and the wind chill made it feel like 20 below. Cell service went spotty. The road became impassable. Marcus woke to silence. No hum of electric lines. No distant sound of traffic from the valley. Just wind and the crackling of fire in his wood stove. He got up, fed Kodiak, and checked his systems. Everything was functioning perfectly. The cabin was 70 degrees inside. The wood stove radiated steady heat. His backup propane heater sat ready if needed. His pantry was stocked for months. Up on the ridge, panic was setting in. Vanessa Hartley stood in her living room wearing 2 jackets and a blanket, watching her breath fog in the air. Her cabin, for all its beauty, was designed around electric heating, electric everything. The massive windows she had insisted on now let heat pour out like water through a sieve. Her fireplace was decorative, running on gas that required an electric ignition system. It would not light. She tried her backup generator. It sputtered twice and died. She had never tested it properly. By Wednesday afternoon, her cabin was 42 degrees inside and dropping. Trevor Sutton was in worse shape. His entire cabin was smart home automated, controlled by systems that required constant power and internet. When the electricity died, his thermostat went dark. His heated floors went cold. His electric fireplace was useless. He had no backup plan because he had never imagined needing one. He wrapped himself in every blanket he owned and huddled in his bedroom, cursing the storm, cursing Montana, cursing his architect for not thinking about this scenario. By Wednesday evening, his cabin was 38 degrees. The Johnsons fared slightly better. They had a fireplace that actually worked, but they had only 2 days' worth of firewood. They burned through most of it the first night, desperate to keep their 3 young children warm. By Thursday morning, they were rationing what remained, and the cold was creeping in through their beautiful, oversized windows. Vanessa finally swallowed her pride and tried calling Marcus. No answer. She had never actually gotten his number, had never bothered. She tried texting through a community group chat, but the message would not send. No service. Trevor attempted to hike down to Marcus's cabin on Thursday afternoon. He made it 50 yards before the waist-deep snow and brutal wind forced him back. He had never worn proper winter gear in his life. His fashionable parka was useless against real cold. That night, Vanessa and Trevor both sat in their dark, freezing cabins, watching the faint glow of light coming from down the slope. Marcus's cabin. The dark, mocked cabin. The cabin that somehow, impossibly, had smoke rising from its chimney and warmth glowing from its small windows. The cabin that was surviving just fine. Friday morning brought no relief. The storm intensified. Weather reports on emergency radio warned that conditions would not improve until Sunday at the earliest. Road crews could not reach Ridge Road. The community was completely isolated. Marcus stood on his small porch, sipping coffee from a metal mug, watching the snowfall. Kodiak bounded through the drifts, joyful and unconcerned. The cabin behind him was warm, the stove burning steady, the temperature inside a comfortable 72 degrees. He had enough would stack to last 3 months. His pantry could feed him until spring if necessary. He saw movement up the ridge. Someone was trying to make their way down. Marcus squinted through the snow and recognized the bright red parka. Trevor Sutton, struggling through the deep snow, falling every few steps, clearly desperate. Marcus watched him for a moment, then went inside. He put on his insulated overalls, his heavy boots, his proper winter coat. He grabbed a coil of rope and headed out, Kodiak following. It took him 20 minutes to reach Trevor, who had collapsed in a drift about 200 yards from Marcus's cabin. The younger man's face was bright red, his expensive parka soaked through, his hands trembling violently. Trevor looked up with tears freezing on his cheeks. "Please," he gasped. "I cannot feel my fingers. My cabin is 28 degrees. I think I am dying." Marcus pulled him to his feet without a word. He looped the rope around Trevor's waist and began the slow trek back to his cabin. Trevor stumbled along behind him, too cold and exhausted to speak. Inside, Marcus sat Trevor by the wood stove and wrapped him in wool blankets. He made hot coffee with honey and forced Trevor to drink it slowly. Kodiak lay at Trevor's feet, adding his warmth. Gradually, color returned to the younger man's face. His shaking subsided. Trevor looked around the dark cabin with new eyes. The thick walls, the small windows with their heavy insulated curtains, the massive wood stove radiating endless heat, the oil lamps providing gentle light. Everything he had mocked, everything he had called primitive was now saving his life. "I am sorry," Trevor said quietly, "for what I said, for how I treated you. You were right and I was an idiot." Marcus poured himself coffee and sat down across from him. "You were not the only one. If you are watching this and hoping these people learn their lesson, take a moment and subscribe to the channel. This story is about to take a turn nobody expected, and you will want to see how it ends." Trevor stared into his mug. Vanessa and the Johnsons. They are in trouble too. The Johnsons have kids. Marcus was already reaching for his coat. Marcus left Trevor wrapped in blankets by the stove and headed back into the storm. The wind had picked up, turning the snowfall into a complete whiteout. He could barely see 10 feet ahead, but he knew these woods. He had walked every inch of this property in all seasons. Kodiak stayed close, his dark fur barely visible against the white. The Johnson cabin came first. Marcus knocked hard on the door. When Emily Johnson opened it, her face crumpled with relief. The cabin behind her was frigid. All 3 children were huddled together on the couch, wrapped in every blanket the family owned. Her husband, Dan, was trying to split their last piece of furniture for firewood. Marcus did not wait for an invitation. He assessed the situation in seconds. Their fireplace was functional but inefficient, bleeding heat up the chimney. They had no proper firewood, no backup heat source. Those kids would not make it another night in these conditions. "Pack essentials," Marcus said. "You are coming with me. All of you." Emily hesitated only a moment before nodding. Within 15 minutes, the Johnson family was trudging through the snow behind Marcus. The children roped together so none would get lost in the whiteout. Getting them settled in his cabin took organization. Marcus moved Trevor to the loft. The Johnsons took the main bedroom. He set up sleeping bags near the wood stove for the kids. His cabin, designed for 1, now held 8 people and a large dog. But it was warm. Critically, importantly, warm. That left Vanessa. Marcus made the climb to her cabin as the sun was setting, though in the storm it was hard to tell day from night. He found her sitting in her kitchen, wearing every piece of clothing she owned, her lips slightly blue. Her pride had kept her isolated even as hypothermia crept in. She looked up when he entered, too cold to be startled. "You came," she whispered. Marcus did not respond to the obvious. He helped her stand, wrapped her in his spare coat, and guided her back down the mountain. She cried silently the entire way, tears freezing on her face before they could fall. By Friday night, Marcus's dark cabin held everyone from the ridge. The cabin that had been mocked, dismissed, called an eyesore and an embarrassment, was now the only thing standing between 11 people and the brutal Montana winter. The wood stove burned steady. The thick walls held the heat. The small windows prevented loss. The dark wood paneling that everyone had ridiculed actually helped retain warmth, absorbing and radiating it back into the space. Every design choice Marcus had made, every detail they had laughed at, now revealed its purpose. Vanessa sat in the corner, watching Marcus efficiently manage his space, his resources, his guests. She finally understood what she had been too blind to see before. This man had not built a cabin. He had built survival. Saturday passed in a strange rhythm. The storm continued its assault outside, but inside Marcus's cabin, a new dynamic emerged. People who had barely acknowledged each other at community meetings now worked together out of necessity. Dan Johnson helped Marcus split wood, learning the proper technique for the first time in his life. Trevor, his hands finally warm enough to function, organized the food supplies and helped cook meals on the wood stove. Emily kept the children entertained with stories and games, her teacher instincts kicking in. Even Vanessa, humbled and quiet, helped where she could, washing dishes in heated water and folding blankets. Marcus said little. He simply worked, keeping the fire fed, the water flowing from his gravity-fed system, the cabin temperature stable. Kodiak moved between people, offering comfort, sensing who needed it most. On Saturday evening, as they all gathered around the wood stove eating a simple stew Marcus had prepared, Vanessa finally spoke what everyone was thinking. "I owe you an apology," she said, looking directly at Marcus. "A real one. I said terrible things about you and your home. I called you backward. I tried to make you feel small." She gestured around the dark cabin. "And this place, this beautiful place I called an eyesore, is the only reason my children still have a mother." Her voice cracked on the last word. The room went silent except for the crackle of fire. Trevor set down his bowl. "I laughed at you," he said. "I showed people pictures of your cabin like it was a joke. I called it the Dark Ages Special." He shook his head. "But you built something real while I bought something pretty. When it mattered, your work saved us. Mine almost killed me." Dan Johnson nodded. "I spent $200,000 on my cabin and did not think once about how it would handle a real winter. You spent a fraction of that and thought about everything. That is not backward. That is wisdom." Marcus looked at the faces around his fire. The children were warm and fed. The adults were safe. That was all that mattered to him. He had not done this for apologies or vindication. He had done it because it was right. But something had shifted. The people who had dismissed him now saw him clearly. The cabin they had mocked now sheltered them. And in that dark, warm space, lessons were being learned that would last far longer than the storm. By Sunday morning, the wind finally died. The snow stopped. Emergency crews reached Ridge Road by afternoon, clearing paths and restoring power. By evening, electricity hummed back to life across the ridge. One by one, Marcus's guests returned to their own cabins, warm now but forever changed. Each person stopped at his door before leaving, offering thanks that went deeper than words. Trevor was the last to leave. He stood in the doorway, looking back at the dark interior that had saved his life. "I will never forget this," he said. "Or what you taught me." Marcus simply nodded. "Stay warm," he replied. 6 months later, spring arrived in Whispering Pines with a burst of wildflowers and warming sun. Ridge Road looked different now. Not in structure, but in spirit. Marcus stood on his porch, watching a truck make its way up the newly graded road. The county had finally fixed the drainage issues, a project Vanessa had pushed through the local government with surprising tenacity. She had learned something about infrastructure that winter, about preparing for reality instead of chasing aesthetics. The truck stopped at his cabin. Dan Johnson climbed out, followed by his oldest son, carrying toolboxes. "We are here for the lesson," Dan called out with a grin. Every Saturday for the past 3 months, neighbors had been coming to Marcus's workshop behind the cabin. He taught them woodworking, basic carpentry, how to split wood properly, how to maintain a wood stove, how to prepare for winter. The classes started with just Dan and Trevor. Now a dozen people showed up each week. Trevor had been the most dedicated student. He sold his automated smart cabin in February and bought a smaller plot further down the mountain. He was building a new place himself, working alongside Marcus, learning every step. It would have small windows, thick walls, and a massive wood stove. He called it his second chance at getting things right. Vanessa made changes too, though she kept her glass palace. She installed a proper backup heating system, stockpiled firewood, and learned to use her decorative fireplace for real warmth. More importantly, she stopped the community meetings about aesthetic standards. She started ones about emergency preparedness instead. The Johnsons winterized their cabin properly, adding insulation and a real wood heating system. Their children still talked about the adventure of staying in Mr. Webb's cabin during the storm, the darkest, warmest, safest place they had ever been. Marcus's cabin was no longer called an eyesore. People drove slowly past it now, pointing it out with respect. "That is Marcus Webb's place," they would say. "Built it himself. Saved 11 lives in the February storm. Knows what he is doing." The ridicule had turned to reverence, but Marcus remained unchanged. He still taught shop at the Valley High School. He still preferred Kodiak's company to most people. He still worked on his cabin in the evenings, always improving, always preparing. But now, on Saturday mornings, his property filled with neighbors eager to learn. And on his porch there was always fresh bread from Emily, craft beer from Trevor, or homemade jam from Vanessa. Small tokens of gratitude that never stopped coming. The dark cabin stood strong among the pines, exactly as Marcus had built it. Purposeful, solid, real. A testament to the difference between what looks good and what actually works when the world turns cold. Thank you so much for watching this story until the very end. If it touched your heart or taught you something valuable, please hit that like button and leave a comment below. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss our next story. And tell us, what kind of story would you like to hear next? Your suggestions inspire us. Until next time, stay warm and stay wise.